What if the reason you can't stay consistent with your goals has nothing to do with motivation? What if the reason you feel irritable, foggy, scattered, or just off isn't stress or diet or mindset, but something you've been dismissing as a luxury? Here's the promise. By the end of this episode, you're going to see sleep completely differently. Not as rest, not as recovery, but as the foundation everything else is built on. And here's what we're covering today: why most of us have been sleeping wrong, not just poorly, but wrong, and what's actually costing us in our performance, our decisions, our moods, our relationships, and our identity as people who want to live well. So here's the thing that we're all getting wrong about sleep. Let's start with the honest truth. Most of us think about sleep pretty much the same way we think about charging a phone. You plug it in when the battery's dead. You unplug it when you have to leave. And if you can get away with 60% charge, you'll take it. That's how a lot of people are running their lives. And it's not working because sleep isn't a passive recharge. It's not the absence of your day. It's not downtime. Sleep is work. It's some of the most important biological work your body and brain do in a 24-hour period, and it only happens when you're unconscious. Most people have never been taught that. So they feel guilty for sleeping, or they brag about surviving on 5 hours, or collapse on the weekend and call it catching up, which, by the way, doesn't fully work the way we think it does. We've been sold a story about sleep that serves productivity culture, not human performance. So in today's day and age, we have the old adage, I'll sleep when I'm dead, that hustle culture that glorifies exhaustion. I used to see one of my friends and she would post online, ooh, should I get up at 4 or 4:30 to start my day today? Well, unless you're going to bed at 8 o'clock at night, and if you have small kids, it's probably difficult. It's not healthy. So yes, you might be powering through that, but it doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do. And so I think that I know for me, I've been in situations where I didn't even realize I was that exhausted until I had something to compare it to and I felt better after full rest. And I think that's where it really sort of the light bulb goes on and we realize, wow, we're really depriving ourselves and we're not the same. We think we're fine, but it's harder to be present. It's harder to focus. It's harder to enjoy anything because we're fighting through that constant battle against fatigue. And we've normalized this. Chronic sleep debt is now a badge of honor. In the same way, if you think about NFL or any of the sports where if you got your head hit, you got your bell rung and you just put your helmet back on, you went back in the game. Well, now we know that that was stupid because people are getting CTE, people are getting brain damage because they're not giving their brains time to recover. And so all of that has changed because we looked at science and realized, hey, this is stupid. It's not brave or tough. It's actually dumb because it's making us perform worse and it's affecting our long-term health. So sleep rarely comes up in health conversations. When anybody talks about health, what do they talk about? Diet, exercise, right? Oh, we got to stop eating so many, carbs or stop eating processed foods. And, we've got to start exercising, which by the way is all true. So it doesn't minimize that. But sleep is always the leftover thought or the completely forgotten or unsaid thing. And in fact, it's usually looked at as toughness if you need less sleep, which is a really, really bad association. So let's talk about what sleep actually is. Now, I'm not going to turn this into a biology class, but I do want you to understand something at a really high level because once you get it, it changes how you think about the hours you spend in bed. When you sleep, your brain does things it literally can't do while you're awake. It consolidates memory. It processes emotions. It clears metabolic waste. There's a whole system in the brain that essentially flushes out the buildup from a day of thinking. Hormones that regulate hunger, stress, growth, and mood, they're either produced or balanced during sleep. Your immune system does a significant portion of its repair and defense work at night. Your nervous system recalibrates. And the stage you're in, light sleep, deep sleep, REM, each one does something different. It's not all the same. And cutting sleep short doesn't just mean less of it. It often means cutting the most valuable parts. So I know that the real difficulty here is when we think about this, right? It's sort of like the maintenance on a building. I remember going through Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and he talked about the idea of the person who runs the machine. and they get this great productivity. So management looks at them and says, wow, you're really crushing it. And then he runs it to the point without ever shutting it down for maintenance. So when the next guy comes in after he gets promoted, the machine breaks down and they say, oh, look, Jim was the best at it. This guy can't produce anything. The machine's constantly broken down. They just didn't recognize the fact that it was because Jim was pushing it too hard. Our bodies are the same thing. If we don't ever close for repairs, eventually things break in ways you didn't expect, and sometimes in ways that are tragic or terrible. So I have a personal story about how sleep, I believe, affected my own life because my mother was chronically sleep deprived. She worked third shift and she was a nurse and worked overnight. And when she was supposed to come home and go to sleep, she didn't want to miss anything because it was daytime. So she would stay up as late as she could. Then she'd fall asleep. And then when we got home from school, she would wake back up. So she was only sleeping 4, 5, sometimes 6 hours a night at most. And at the time, it didn't seem like much. But in her early 70s, even 60s, she started to develop memory problems. She couldn't remember things quite as well. And then a few years later, ended up having a stroke. And so I'm convinced that a lot of that comes back to the fact that she had chronic sleep deprivation the whole time. I don't have clinical proof. It's just anecdotal evidence. But when I put it all together, combined with the sleep studies that I've seen, I'm pretty confident that that is the case. And so I think it's super important that, you can't think your way through sleep deprivation the same way that you might push through physical discomfort, right? The brain literally loses objectivity about its own impairment, and that's where it becomes really dangerous. So the real cost of poor sleep is not just tiredness. This section I really want you to sit with. Because when we talk about the cost of bad sleep, most people think I'm tired, I'm groggy, need more coffee. Yeah, I know, I've been there. This is not a sermon. I'm guilty of this myself. It's why I want to share it. I think it's super important. All that stuff is surface level. What's actually happening underneath is the bigger issue. Your decision making degrades. And I mean that structurally, the part of your brain responsible for impulse control, long-term thinking, and nuanced judgment, it's one of the first things to suffer. So you're not making the same quality decisions after poor sleep. You're more reactive. You're more impulsive. You're more likely to choose what feels good now over what you actually want long-term. Your emotional regulation tanks. You become more sensitive to stress, more likely to snap at the people you love, more likely to interpret neutral situations as threatening. Sleep-deprived people are measurably more negative in how they process the world around them. Cravings spike, your hunger hormones shift. You're more drawn to high sugar, high fat, high calorie foods, not because you have no willpower, but because your biology is compensating for an energy deficit in the only way it knows how in the short term. Your stress response is heightened. Cortisol, your primary stress hormone, doesn't regulate as well. So things that wouldn't bother you on a good day start to pile up. Small friction feels bigger. Recovery from stress takes longer. And here's the one that doesn't get talked about enough. Sleep affects who you believe you are. When you're consistently sleep deprived, you start to see yourself as someone who can't stick to things, someone who's always behind, someone who reacts badly or eats poorly or doesn't have the energy for the people they love. You start to build an identity around that version of yourself, and you may not even realize that it's not you. It's your nervous system running on empty. So again, when I think back to my mom and her situation, I know that there definitely were some negative health effects long term because of it. And they didn't show up right away. She did it for, 15 years or so. So it isn't like the context or the symptoms show up right away. Some of the early ones do, but the worst ones don't show up till later. I know in my own life, I recognized this when I started building my business in 2007. For the first several years, I was grinding quite a bit. I had small kids at home. I was working and I was trying to build my business. And I was also going to graduate school at night. So I had very little time. And I was literally staying up as late as I possibly could, 1, 2 in the morning. And I had to get up at 6 o'clock the next day. And I did this for a little while. I was very irritable. I was almost never present when I look back at those times in things that were going on in my life. And I understood it had to be short term. No one says you should never grind. Sometimes you have to do that. but it can't be sustained for long periods or there are really major negative consequences. So I made a conscious decision when I started to recognize this, and I didn't know anything about sleep. I just felt it intuitively that I knew I needed to change something. I couldn't keep going the way that I was. And the astonishing thing is, I actually thought I was okay during those times. I thought I was doing pretty well. Once I shifted and I started committing to 7 hours of sleep, what happened was really dramatic because I started to feel better and I started to look back at that time and I started to realize that all the stuff that I thought was normal in my behavior, all the stuff that I had just normalized by doing it so much was actually not healthy. And it was the result of being stretched too thin all the time. So it'll show up in our behavior, our relationships, our decision making. And that identity piece is really powerful, right? So think about the version of yourself that, you're frustrated with, might have a sleep problem. If you're ever feeling like you're short fused and it doesn't seem like you, but that's the way you are. If you're ever feeling like you're irritable when you're sitting in traffic or you're at a red light or whatever it is, somebody cuts you off, those kinds of things, sure, sometimes that's normal, but if it's a habit, if it's a pattern, you want to look deeper and see if maybe something is wrong with the way that you're actually sleeping. If there are elements of you that you're not that pleased with, but you can't explain, that's possibly one of the symptoms. So start to look at your sleep schedule. The craving and discipline connection also is super important, because we can get by to a certain extent on willpower, but it's not a moral quality, it's a physiological resource. And sleep does restore it. So if we're struggling with willpower, that will help us. And for relationships, if you're short tempered with people, if you're less present, if you're less emotionally available, people can feel that. And what usually happens is we attribute that to anything other than sleep, right? Oh, well, that's just who I am, or I'm just busy right now, or, maybe I'm just not that good a friend or a spouse or whatever. The reality of it is, let's start by calibrating what matters the most so we're the best version of ourselves. Then we can look at other circumstances, but let's look at sleep first. And so this is really a culture problem because exhaustion gets mistaken for ambition. And, there's a story a lot of driven people tell themselves, and it goes something like this. And I know it intuitively because this was me. I'll rest when things slow down. Right now, I just need to push. The work is too important. The goal is too close. Sleep is for people who are weak or aren't serious. I've heard that story. I've told myself that story. And maybe you've told yourself a version of it too. And here's what I want to gently challenge. That story isn't ambition. It's a coping mechanism with branding on it. Real performance, sustained, high quality, consistent performance requires recovery, not as an afterthought, not as a reward, as a component of the system. Athletes understand this. The best coaches in the world will tell you that training breaks the body down. Recovery is where the adaptation happens. I know this to be true from bodybuilding. I've been into weight training since I've been a teenager, and I studied all the Mr. Olympias. And one of the most amazing things to me that I was fascinated by was the fact that they sleep 10 to 12 hours a day when they're in training. I thought 10 to 12 hours a day, but they understand that all the best workouts that they do, if they don't get the rest, they shortchange the gains that they're trying to reach. And so you don't get stronger during the workout. You get stronger in the rest between workouts when the body repairs and rebuilds above its previous baseline. That same principle applies to your mind, your creativity, your emotional capacity, your leadership, and your relationships. Skipping recovery doesn't mean you're working harder. It means you're borrowing against a debt that'll eventually come due. So the hustle culture framing isn't just a mindset problem, it's a biological misunderstanding. We think that, that's the way that we're going to be tough, when in reality, all we're doing is being stupid. So when we see that people are achieving so much externally, but they feel terrible internally, they have high output but low vitality. We all know this person. Maybe we've seen them online somewhere as one of our favorite personalities, where for some reason, at a younger age, they seem to look older, despite the fact they've accomplished a lot. They don't look that good, right? They look worse for the wear, like they've been through the ringer, yet they've achieved all this success, so it doesn't make a lot of sense. Well, there's probably a reason for that. because if you are ri getting rid of sleep as the one thing that you can sort of, trade off for more productivity and higher output, chances are your vitality and energy are going to drop. So the difference between being productive and being depleted is that it's very easy to mistake one for the other when you've been running on low for so long that it feels normal. And that was the point I wanted to bring up before. When I had my business and I was doing it, at first it was a bit of a struggle. As soon as I adjusted to it, my body adapted to the idea that this is all the sleep I'm going to get. And so with that, I just believed that was my new normal and I thought that was sustainable. But when we're optimizing our output without optimizing our recovery, it's like trying to improve your car's performance while never changing the oil. It's never going to work. So, sleep and body vitality is the foundation. Everything we talk about when it comes to body vitality, energy, physical health, mental clarity, emotional regulation, how you feel in your body day to day, it all runs through sleep. You can eat well, you can move your body, you can manage stress, you can hydrate, supplement, breathe, meditate. All that matters. But if your sleep is broken, those other things are working uphill. Sleep is the baseline. It's not the ceiling, it's the floor. And when the floor is solid, everything built on top of it gets more traction. Your nutrition choices land better because your cravings aren't fighting you. Your workouts recover properly. Your mood is more stable. Your thinking is cleaner. Your relationships have more room. Body vitality isn't a collection of isolated habits, it's an integrated system, and sleep is the cornerstone of that system. So you can't optimize your way out of a sleep deficit. There are only so many hours in a day, and that is a vital function the same way eating is. If you thought about your life and you said, you know what, I'm just not going to drink any water anymore. I'm just not going to eat anymore. I can survive on less and less. What's going to happen? You're going to start to wither. Your brain isn't going to work as well because your body is nutrition deprived. You're not going to feel good. You're going to be weak. You're going to be tired. The same thing happens with sleep, but we don't recognize it the same way. And that's the reason that it's super important. You have to address it at the source. So this is an integrated system, right? If sleep is the foundation, fixing it doesn't just improve sleep, it lifts everything else. Think about it as the high tide that rises all ships. So I can tell you from personal experience also, and I challenge you to do the same thing. When I got in the habit of sleeping at least 7 hours a night, and you can figure out what it is for you, but science tends to say it's around 7 hours at a minimum. If you're getting 7 hours of sleep, one of the things that I noticed is my energy level starts off better. My ability to handle challenges early on starts off better. And my ability to regulate and work through challenges is better as well. So every single thing, I require less caffeine. I require less external stimulation. And I have a lot of experience with sleep deprivation. So again, it isn't like I'm telling you something that I've been living my life in. I'm guilty of this, which is why I want to share it because I think it's so important. I have been conscious of it and recognized the difference in myself. I've seen the impacts it's had on people I love in my family. And so I want to make sure that I'm sharing that as well. So you'll notice how it touches other areas of your life if you take the challenge and commit to sleeping longer and just pay attention to what happens. So the bottom line with all of that is it's super important to be able to get that baseline set so everything else can be better. So before we close out, I want to give you a few questions to actually sit with. It's not a checklist, it's not a protocol, just some honest questions because sometimes the most useful thing isn't more information. It's a moment of real reflection. So here they are. Question one. When you think about your sleep over the last few weeks, not just the hours, but the quality, the consistency, how you feel in the morning, what's actually true? Question two. Are there ideas or areas in your life where you've been frustrated with yourself, discipline, mood, energy, patience, that might have been a sleep component that you've been overlooking? Question three. What's the story you've been telling yourself about sleep? Is it a priority? Is it an indulgence? Is it something you'll get to eventually? And is that story actually serving you? Question four. If you slept better, consistently, intentionally, protectively, what would be different? What version of yourself shows up when you're well rested? Take those with you, sit with them, even just one of them. So, reflection without action will allow us to stay comfortable. I want you to take what we've talked about today and commit to giving it a shot. If you're someone who's sleep deprived, and this struck a chord and you recognize it, don't just turn it off and move on to the next thing and get back to your hustle. Pick one thing that you want to shift. You don't have to overhaul everything overnight, but sleep improvement doesn't have to be perfect. Even consistent marginal improvement will help, and it will compound over time. And if you're thinking, well, that's great, but I literally don't have time to sleep, I understand. I had grad school, I had kids at home, I worked a full time job, I started a business all at the same time. And there was a period of time where I couldn't do it. But I was able to be more productive in the hours I was awake when I was sleeping more. So as soon as I committed to just doing it anyway, even though there wasn't enough time to sleep, what I found was the waking hours I had were so much more productive, it more than made up for the extra hour of sleep. So I challenge you to do the same thing. And it's super important that, you don't want to have screens on and light at night. And you want to make sure that you're getting good quality sleep in addition to good quantity. And that has been a huge shift for me in terms of getting that extra hour of sleep going from 6 to 7 has made a major difference. So sleep is one of those things that we all do, but very few of us do it intentionally. And I think that's where the opportunity is, not in hacking it, not in finding the perfect supplement or the perfect mattress or the perfect protocol, but in actually taking it seriously and treating the hours you spend asleep as part of your performance, not apart from it. Because when you sleep well, really well, consistently, you show up differently. You think more clearly, you feel more like yourself, you have more to give, and you start to build a relationship with your own vitality that doesn't depend on caffeine and momentum to stay afloat.